All right, good afternoon, everyone. I serve my daytime work at the Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine. But what I really like to do is to translate the science we have into actionable items. What can we do right now? What take-homes can we do right now? And so that's really the goal of today, is to leave you with a few take-home action items so that you could implement something right now or tell the people in your businesses exactly what we're talking about today. When I talk about performance, everyone assumes I'm speaking about an athlete, but I don't really mean that. And so for me, I think about performance as a little bit different in that it affects every single person. And if you read this quote up here, I think it allows you to meet the demands of your job, the demands of your family, and your specific goals. And for me, that could be athletic performance, but it could also be walking upstairs, carrying a grandchild, being at your desk and being productive in the time you're actually at work. We often joke about how, especially in this room, the moms in the group can get it done in a very short period of time. And you're so focused and so ready to go, and it's really important to recognize how, if you are ready to perform, you can get way more done in a short period of time. That's more impressive to me than telling me you stayed up all night long just to get a task done. And so that's really where I'm coming from with this performance angle. And when you think about it in the corporate setting, in terms of your businesses and how you're managing your staff and all that, everything about performance will impact how someone performs in the workplace as well. So if you read around the outside of this, I think we do everything from stress management, certainly impacts cognitive performance. That's what you want in your performance at work. Workplace physical activity and nutrition obviously impacts things like body composition and things you're interested about. Sleep and nutrition, we got to think about memory, cognition, how can we actually be better on the work site? And lastly, just being more focused and having greater resilience, something that we all need right now. And how can we get that done? And for me, that starts with physical activity and nutrition. And I want to sort of couch this with this quote, which I think really brings it together, which is, workplace performance begins with your health, not your to-do list. You can get so much more done if you bring your whole self to any project you're working on. And that to-do list, that pesky task list certainly is always sitting there, but without the physical and cognitive ability to perform optimally on those tasks, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And for me, that's the most important part of this. I often show this picture because I'm going to tell you a lot about physical activity today, but despite the best efforts we have to improve physical activity, we still have situations like this where you're heading into a gym and you're still taking the escalator. That's right up there. And then a few years ago at the Arnold Sports Festival, this great picture was taken. And at the this is for Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Arnold Sports Festival, you would hope everybody would be taking the stairs, but that's not the case either. And every major conference I go to, all those places like the American College of Sports Medicine and National Strength and Conditioning Association, you name it, almost always this is what you're seeing. And so we'll talk about ways that we might be able to improve that or encourage people to take the other route, but it's just harder. Maybe you're walking with a bunch of friends. Maybe it's socially unacceptable because you're with a group that's going to take the escalator or the elevator. Even today, there were stairs right in front of us. Did we all take those? Did we do the elevator? Did we do different ways to get up here? So it's really just reframing what you think about as terms of physical activity. All right, so for today, the core performance levers that I think we're going to talk about most are here. Movement and muscle. That's going to be the majority of what I talk about today, why muscle is so critically important for us. And not only just, I sort of like to flip it, so not just the negatives that can come from excess adipose tissue or fat tissue, but really what's going on with how weak we are, how little muscle mass we have, and what that does for performance, longevity, and workplace health. We'll also talk about protein briefly because we do a ton of research on that here at FSU, and then we'll also talk about sleep because that is so critically important for every part of your life. And without that base, you can't even do the other things that you have going on in your life. All right, so the first part of this is that if you don't get a lot of physical activity, you are not new to this. This is exactly what happens for most individuals, in that 75% of U.S. adults don't meet the basic exercise recommendations. That's quite a lot of individuals. 75% don't meet that. So you may find you fall into that. Now, I just pulled this figure yesterday, which is the new look at how much inactivity we have. The last time I showed this, if anyone was at the previous talk a few months ago, we were looking at outdated data, and everybody in Florida, look down here, we're in this 25 to 30% of people are completely inactive, sedentary, no physical activity. And when this was back to 2015, it was less than 20%. So we've gone up from 2015 till now, 10 years later or so, to over 25 to just less than 30% in this state. But as you can see, the Southeast in general is kind of problematic. And then the worst ones are the Deep South, and you see this greater than 30% of individuals are completely sedentary. All right, so why do we care? What does that mean to us? And I think we have to frame this in the context of what are the actual recommendations so we can know, are we actually hitting those recommendations? So currently, what we look at is 3 different categories for the physical part of this. There's strength training, there's aerobic training, and then there's flexibility training. And I think that they're all manageable, but if you look at this as a whole, or if you haven't done this before, it can seem like, holy cow, I can't even get one day. How could I do all of this stuff? And that's not what I want to leave you with, because a lot of experts now, especially if you're on social media, you're always thinking like you cannot do every single thing they're saying, right? Just the other day, someone said, I can't even touch my receipts anymore. So that's where we're at. There's too much information and too much overload. With exercise, specifically, strength training is recommended at 2 to 3 days per week. Aerobic training is recommended at 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise or 75 minutes of intense exercise. And the last one would be flexibility for a minimum of 2 days per week. So again, that's what the previous slide was saying we don't hit. 75% of people do not hit those numbers. So most of us would probably fall into that category. To expand on that, especially in the workplace, we have a problem with how much we sit. And sitting it ends up being more than 6+ hours is where you find yourself in this danger zone. 47% of our days are spent seated, and we have 11 hours of daily average of sedentary time, so not just seated, but laying down, etc. So that's about where we're at nationwide, and then we're going to sort of show what are the consequences of this. And it has led some people to say that your chair is more dangerous than your phone. I don't know if that's accurate or not. That's just one of the statements that we see in this context. All right, now let's talk about muscle, because muscle for me is not just about aesthetics or how you look or how much weight you can lift, but it's a health metric. It is certainly a health metric that we have to be really, really careful of. And if you are online at all and you see people talking about muscle, it's becoming more popular, especially with women, to encourage more strength training and to really push how much strength you have. There's a lot of talk about this, and it's for good reason. The number one reason we are incapable of moving when we get older is because you can't get out of a seated position. That makes you in a wheelchair, that makes you homebound, that makes you have to have full-time help. And so the strength in your leg muscles and core to actually stand up are something that we should all be really careful to keep over time. And as you know, we're in this situation where a lot of us can get to a certain point and then you're just trying to hold on decade after decade. How much can I hold on to over time? The good news is no matter if you haven't even started, you can always add a little bit of muscle. But the key is for the younger generations to sort of add as much muscle, flexibility, strength, aerobic fitness by the time you hit about 30 to 40, and then you're at a really good place, because you will lose some over time, but is it going to be 30% or is it going to be 2%? And that's lifestyle dependent. How long can you maintain what you've got?
Is it ever too late to start with weight training? Is there a point where you just can't too old to build muscle anymore?
No, not at all. There's actually studies for people in their 90s that are starting exercise and still are able to add muscle mass with directed programs. And the really good news now, and I'll get to some of the recommendations later on, is that strength training doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to be as heavy as possible. It doesn't have to look like that at all, particularly to adding a little bit of muscle and muscle size. The newest recommendations that come out, which I'll show you at the end, that came out about 3 weeks ago from the American College of Sports Medicine, really indicate that as long as you're getting close to muscular failure, you could do that in 3 repetitions if you're lifting really heavy, or 30 if you decide to use a lighter weight. And that really depends on how much time you have, what your capacity is to move that weight. Do you have any injuries or limitations? So there's many, many different ways to do that now, which is great, really great. Okay, so these other things are important, so just kind of look through the list: blood sugar control, fat burning capacity, your ability to move and get around, bone density, et cetera. Like, pick the one that's important to you, or two, and that's where you should focus. That's really the gist of today, and I want to highlight that muscle and adipose tissue have just drastically different functions for you. It isn't just good or bad, but there are just complementary things that they do. So muscle we think about as anti-inflammatory effects, things that actually help you to improve insulin sensitivity with the more muscle mass you have. One of the things we like to talk about is muscle as being like a sponge. And so we are really good at trying to get things out of our bloodstream like sugar and put it into our muscle. The more muscle you have, the more ability you have to get those things out of your blood where it could be problematic and store it. And so it serves as this sponge sort of feature where you can basically clear the blood out of these things that you might not want circulating, like high glucose levels. We also know that caloric burn at rest is higher, not a lot higher, but a little bit higher with more muscle mass, posture, balance, etc. Lots of interesting parts. And then adipose tissue, or fat tissue on the other side, is essentially the opposite. We are required to have a certain amount of fat to protect our organs, for reproductive purposes, etc. And you guys probably all are familiar with this, but women tend to have more body fat than men, so there are sex differences here, but that's biological, and that is for really specific reasons. And if we continue on this line, one of the best studies that I've seen to date sort of highlights what the muscle and fat tissue look like over time. These are MRI images. So if you can see on the left-hand side, it's a young, active individual. It's a thigh picture, and you can see a little bit around the outside is fat, that lighter gray color, or darker gray color, sorry, and then the inside is muscle. On the right-hand side, you see a 75-year-old sedentary individual, and you can see a lot more adipose tissue between the skin and the muscle itself, and you can see a lot of marbling. That means that the fat is now infiltrated into the muscle itself, and it looks different. Right? So that's generally what you see if you're going to remain sedentary. Now, I put this study outside my door in my office for ages because it was my favorite view of this. And this study looked at people who were active their entire lives. And so the top image, again, a 40-year-old triathlete, kind of looks like the 25-year-old muscle we saw in the previous slide. And it looks great. Nice muscle quality, a thin layer of lipid around the outside, or fat that you would expect. And then you have a 74-year-old sedentary individual, a lot more adipose tissue, a lot more infiltration into the muscle itself. But the third image I'm about to show you is for someone who's that same age, but they've decided to stay active their entire lives, in this case still competing as a master's athlete. And that's a 70-year-old triathlete's muscle. In terms of quality, when you analyze this with different techniques in a laboratory, it's no different from the 40-year-old triathlete. And one of my favorite quotes of all time comes out of this paper, which is this: muscle mass and strength decline with chronic disuse rather than muscle aging alone. So it's not just that you're getting older, it's because you're sedentary. Now, you will have small changes over time, but they don't have to be as drastic as you see in the top and middle picture, because if you stay active, you can maintain the quality of that muscle. That means you're up and out of a chair. That means you're not stuck having help getting on and off of a toilet. That means you can be ambulatory and move around your entire life. And so for me, that alone is really good motivation to try to stay as active as possible, within the realms of what that very first slide said, true to self. Like, I want to do things that fit into my lifestyle, not something that totally disrupts it where I don't feel like myself anymore. We need to identify as that healthy person and how in the constraints of our own lives. When we put this in the context of longevity, so I've told you about getting up and out of a chair, but there's actually data that looked at muscle mass, how much muscle mass you had, and then followed you until you had a problem like death, in this case mortality. All right? And in the top image, this darkest line on top is if you had more muscle, and the bottom image is if you had less muscle. And so the gist here is that using these data over almost 4,500 patients in this, over the age of 55, those with more muscle mass lived longer. So all-cause mortality was reduced by having more muscle mass on your frame. Very nice. And one of the things is fractures and wrists. Does anyone have a parent or a grandparent or somebody who's fallen and broken a hip? And the data on that is startling, because once that happens, the chance of death within the next 2 years is huge.
Why is that?
A lot of it's because of the sedentary nature, and then once you're in that position, between the psychological changes, now I'm confined to a chair, and the inactivity, typically it's also happening in older individuals, so there's lots of compounding factors. There's a way out of it though, which is the more physical activity, and those people tend to recover and go back to living a normal life. The later in age that happens, the harder it is.
You may be explaining this, but just in case you're not going to go into that, do you think that these effects are due to more, or how much is due to more muscle by itself versus the other things that come with having more muscle, or the activities that you're doing, or other effects on other parts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So confounding factors, like what is also influencing that? If I have more muscle, is there a chance I just do other things like take care of my sleep and my nutrition as well, and other daily lifestyle habits? This particular study did co-founders in their statistical analysis to try to rule out everything else, including smoking, nutrition, and all of it. So they're trying to isolate the effect of muscle itself. But I don't think you could ever really do it because it's really causation or correlation, not causation in these. But certainly that halo effect exists. Yeah. So overall muscle mass, I hope I'm convincing you that that's a really good thing to have and to add to your frame and to just maintain as long as you possibly can. If you want a real relative metric, this is another really neat study where they looked at push-up capacity. Now I need to say this study was done in men. The study has not been replicated in women. So we have to figure out what that number is. But for men, that magic number where you have some disease protection, and this is where you had any kind of cardiovascular event. That could be a heart attack, it could be needing a stent, it could be any related issue with your heart. At 10 repetitions, you start above 10 repetitions of push-ups consecutively, you started to have some protection. Maximum protection was seen at more than 41 consecutive push-ups. So if anyone wants to come up and demo their push-up skills, come on, and you can try. Well, go home and try. I would see how many you can do. What's your push-up capacity? Again, the data are for men, not for women. These were firefighters, and they were tracked over a long period of time after they had the initial measurements until they had a cardiac incident. Neat data. The other thing we often look at in terms of strength, if you don't prefer to do push-ups, although I'd suggest adding those in a little bit, are looking at your grip strength. That is a really easy measure to do. A lot of gyms will have this, and most of the research in longevity and healthy aging include a test where you simply squeeze what's called a hand dynamometer and as hard as you can, and it gives you how much weight you can actually pull that thing closed with. And what this is showing us is quartiles. So like they took however much we all could squeeze, and they cut us into quarters. Top, next, and lowest. And then if they did that, if you fell into the top category, you had the most ability to survive all of these other incidences, like all-cause mortality, cardiovascular problems, myocardial infarction, or heart attacks. Every one of those, including stroke, was improved. And then every 5 kilogram decrease, so let's say I could squeeze this with 15 kilograms of strength. If I could only do 10, my risk goes up 16% for all-cause mortality, 17% for cardiovascular, 7% for myocardial infarction, and stroke 9% for every 5 kilogram drop in that number. So really easy to get that number. And then most recently, this just came out a couple weeks ago. This picture is from the Washington Post, but this was specifically in women, so age 63 to 99 years old. And the conclusion from this study was that strength turned out to be a key and singular contributor to longer lives, reducing the risk of early death by 1/3 or more. So again, data point after data point, study after study, decade after decade, turns out muscle mass is critically important for almost everything we can do with all-cause mortality, health outcomes, cardiovascular outcomes, and the ability to be mobile in our lives. Very, very, very important for us. If we're going to sum all of that piece up together, you can see between heart health, metabolic health, I was telling you about blood sugar disposal, the sponge technique of our actual muscles, mental health for sure ties into this, and then our blood profiles. All of that has to do with our muscle, is correlated in some way back to how much muscle mass we can actually carry. Now, one of the main questions I get, particularly from women in an audience of all levels, is I don't want to look like a man, and I don't want to have so much muscle mass. I don't think that's attractive to look at. And then I would say, I've been trying to get more muscle mass on my frame for 40 years, and this is best I can do. So it is extremely hard. The analogy that a lot of people give is that would be like getting your car and thinking that you're, because you can drive, you're a race car driver. Like, that's just not how it works. Because you have muscle or can lift weights, you're not going to be a bodybuilder. And so those things need to be sort of adjusted for. And outside of strength, the other issue that people have as we age is power. So how quickly can you move? So here's a story about that. So one of the things that you may find if you've been walking around with anybody, if we were to trip off of a curb or to stumble a little bit, you have the power and the speed to move your limb to get back underneath so you don't fall. That happens, right? You trip over a curb, you stumble, but you don't fall down. As soon as you can't put your foot back underneath you quick enough, you're going to fall. And if you have other things like extremely low muscle mass, we call that sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass with age. And then now maybe you've broken a hip. Now you're in a situation where you don't have enough muscle. You might have excess adiposity, and you don't have the power to actually protect yourself from situations like that. This particular study that just came out was looking at what's more important, strength or power in this longevity piece. And this study actually showed that it was power. And so what that means is that some of the training that I'll recommend that you try to incorporate isn't just moving weight, but it's moving weight quickly. And so you would take amount of weight you can lift, you would drop it way down because clearly it has to be a little bit lighter to move it fast, and you would practice moving like that. And that's how you keep that power going in and avoiding some of these issues. So in this study, relative muscle power was a stronger predictor than strength for overall mortality.
So you don't have to be jumping?
Not necessarily.
So you're talking about like you do bicep curl, you take the
The way they did this study
as fast as possible?
was an upright row, and they did it in how much you could lift divided by how much you weighed. And so the figures I didn't put up there, but they were listed out almost in quartiles, and it's how quickly could you pull that weight at a certain percentage of your body weight. So the same thing would be lower limb. Jumping is a good way to do it, but if you've not jumped in a while, I wouldn't recommend going and jumping. Just like if you've never played pickleball, don't go and do it. You're going to blow your Achilles out like the TOC loves right now. Ease into it. You got to get those things ready to move like that again. But the power aspect is really, really important along with strength. The muscle is so critically important to how we're going to live our lives and how long and how healthy we're going to be as we're aging. So that piece is really important. Now, here's the nuts and bolts of what you should do about it. This is the article I said just came out last week or the week before, which was the American College of Sports Medicine position stand on resistance training. And they looked at something like 130 different review papers to compile this thing. So it's a massive amount of data. One of the biggest things that you can see is just how many areas of your life and physical activity, physical performance that strength training can impact. So you can see strength itself specifically, daily tasks, balance, timed up and go, which is a big predictor of how quickly you can get up and move, gait, speed, muscular endurance, muscle mass, and power. All of those things are impacted by it. Now, the next slide is a little busy, but I'm going to walk you through it. It's a cartoon and it's kind of busy, not the best image, but I tried to put it together for what you might be interested in. So let's start on the right-hand side because there's like an easy 5-step process here. So consistency beats perfection. That means that if you can only lift each Tuesday and that's it and be consistent about it, I'd rather you do that than do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and not do anything again for 2 months. Right? So just pick that one little task you can get done and just lay that in as your consistency. Match your training to your goal. So that could be muscle strength, muscle size, muscle power. What is the exact goal you're training for? Number 3 is make it personal. So what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. We want to make that to our lifestyle and our starting point. Where are we starting at right now? The next one is you don't need a gym. The data indicate you can do this at home. You can do this with bands. You can do this with household items. Anything to get started is better than nothing. And then last one is the most advanced techniques that you hear about that confuse the whole situation are completely optional and probably only really needed for certain specialty cases like bodybuilders, or you have a crazy injury or something you're working around. So that's kind of the good news. It's a little bit easier. The recommendations are a little bit more simple than they used to be in terms of what exactly we are recommending. Up here for strength, you would want to use a little bit heavier load. So you add a little more weight to the bar or weight that you're lifting. Full range of motion is always recommended. Some people think that lifting weights will make you too bulky and you can't move and reach. But the truth is, if you're going through a full range of motion, you actually get better. So that's an important piece, the full range of motion. The recommendation from this review is 2 to 3 sets, and then you're looking at just 2 times a week to have your great response to strength. Hypertrophy, on the other hand, that's one I was talking about, where you can use light or heavy loads, and those are 10 plus sets per week. You can break that up however you need to. So if you know you have one day, you'd have a longer session, but if you can break it into 2, you can just do 5 sets the first time and 5 sets the second time per muscle group. And then you want to look at progressive volume, meaning adding weight and or reps over time, because you need to progress each time. That's why it's important to keep a journal or use an app or something that tracks how you're doing. That way you know you're progressing over time. And then for hypertrophy, which is the growth of the muscle, you would almost rather focus on the lowering of the weight than the lifting of the weight. That actually impacts that muscle a little bit more. And then here's the power part of this. For power, you're lowering the weight you're lifting to much lower. Let's say 30% of what you know you can lift. You're dropping it to just 30%. And you move it fast. And that can be any of those exercises we already talked about, and it's low to moderate volume. The whole gist of it comes down to those consistency. Just keep it part of your life. Progression, so that you get a little bit better each week or each month. You adhere to it. The worst thing I see, and I see it all the time, is people say, what do I need to do? I'm going to start tomorrow. I'm going to do a whole new diet. I'm going to start exercising every single day. I'm going to take every supplement. I'm going to sleep perfectly. And then that doesn't last at all. And you may have even experienced it where you just completely fall off. And so the way we run it at our lab and train our folks is that it's much better to pick one thing only and just do that one thing. Make it so easy that you feel like it's not even a change at all. And then once that becomes a habit, then you might layer in the next thing. When it's all done at once, it just doesn't make any sense. It'd be like going to a personal trainer, and because I can deadlift 315, I take a brand new person and say, no, just do it. I can do it. It doesn't work that way. Just like eating. If I say, just eat the way I do, well, that doesn't make any sense either. You got to start where that person's at and just sort of add those habits in over time. All right. Don't worry, though. That may still seem like a lot, even though I'm trying to say you can do it just once and be consistent with it. There's data that show about half the exercise is at least beneficial. So even if you can do half of what I'm saying to do, there are data that show an impact on obesity, lipid profile, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, et cetera. Again, starting somewhere, just making some small habit. I had a guy come into the lab who wanted to work out with me, and he was one of these, I'm going to change everything all at once. And instead I said, why don't you lift here once a week and then just do a long walk with your dog once a week. That was all we were going to add. And it turned out that even that was too much, where something fell off. And so you have to really back it off. The way that we describe it is, for yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that you can do this forever? And if you tell me a 6, that's not nearly close enough. 7, not close enough. I need an 8, 9, 10, 9 or 10, hopefully, where it's so easy that if all I say is, can you drink 1 more cup of water a day? And you say, no problem. That's very easy to do. Start there. Work that for 2 weeks. The other part that's really helpful is to add a habit rather than remove something. So instead of being restrictive, try to add something. That's just like the water example. Can I add a bit of water? Can I add a fish oil supplement? Can I do something really small that is beneficial, rather than saying, can I restrict all of my food and not eat anything? And so that's just a mindset that really helps a lot in this. All right, so that's the resistance training portion. When we talk about cardiovascular exercise, we can't forget that that's a big component here as well. I just think that if you're going to have to make a decision of choosing, I would probably go with the weight training side because of all those benefits. However, I also like cardiovascular exercise and competed in several half Ironman events in my life and enjoy it quite a lot. But you have to be able to get the mix in that is suitable to your lifestyle. And so for cardiovascular exercise, there's a whole host of things that are really important that it can absolutely impact. But the thing is to start with walking. If you're in a place where you're not doing anything, then definitely start with the walking, because we know that we can have reduced mortality with walking alone, and we know changes in blood pressure and blood sugar come about pretty quickly with that. One easy habit is to simply walk after a meal, because there's data that show a 10-minute walk after your meals is really good at disposing the glucose you just ate, and if you have more muscle mass, getting into your muscles, because that happens through two different mechanisms, and one of those is the contracting of the muscles itself. So walking, it would be a great way to contract that muscle after you eat a meal to try to get that out of your blood and into your muscle. Really easy to do. All right, how many steps do you need? We hear 10,000 all the time, but that's actually an overshoot. It's great to get that many or more, but the latest research that came out just at the end of last year was showing that you get initial reduction at just 2,000 steps. Now, all of us know this number because it's in your phone or you wear a watch or whatever it is. Look at that number and just try to follow it over time. Not every device is super accurate, but if you use the same device over time, you can have at least a trend in the way that this is looking for you. 5,000 to 7,000 looks to be the sweet spot for all these different cardiovascular issues that can come about. And so we tend to now recommend trying to hit that 7,000 steps. Has anyone heard of the CDC study where they looked at a stairwell and tried to make people take the stairs a little bit more? This was done a long time ago, 1998. And what they did is they tried to increase the stair use over time. They did things like added art, added better lighting. They added music. They added carpets. Other studies that were like this got all the local elementary schools to donate art, and they just put those up in the hallways. And it made people want to go into those hallways and take the stairs. And so at your businesses, if the stairwell looks like something you would never want to go in for safety reasons, you could try to put lights and music and art from your families or whatever that is to try to make it a little more inviting to do it. And when they did this, they saw improvements across the board in stair use by adding this type of thing to just a business culture. So just a use example where it's actually shown to be effective in this case. All right, so not knowing the audience that would specifically be here today, I wanted to add a little bit about what can be done within your own businesses to promote employee health. So things like offering healthy food options in cafeterias and vending machines are pretty common. You probably know that, and we'll get into the protein section next. Introducing point of decision sides to encourage stair use, and just like I went through with that example. Sometimes work schedules can be a real interesting part of this. In the workplace, it probably becomes a little bit harder, but in the school system, it's really important, particularly when we talk about sleep. Right now, there's a trend, I'll get to sleep section as well, but right now, like teenagers, there's a huge percentage that are sleeping less than 5 hours a night. And they attribute it mostly to the time of the school and to our devices. Not that the light is specifically doing it, but that they're staying up later doing things they wouldn't normally do if that device wasn't there. But we also start schools really early, and work can be the same way. So if there's a flexible way at all in some people's lives, perhaps that's useful to try to implement. And there's examples with like huge Amazons and Googles and things where they've done this, and they have pretty good outcomes for employee health by having more flexible schedules to be being able to manipulate it a little bit. I know we have some current programs for reimbursement of community fitness centers, so that's a real big help. And then any facilities in the area. I'm lucky enough to work in a facility that has a gym, and so for all of my team, we do task-based things. So a deadline for an event, I don't care if you're sitting there all day, but use the gym. I like to as well. Come and go, but just hit the deadlines for each time rather than being stuck at a desk from a certain time to a certain time. And so that makes them think they have more creative control, and they do, and it also lets them have a little bit of a life flexibility around it. All right, a few metrics you can measure just because I think it's important to know. Resting heart rate. Does anybody know their resting heart rate? All right, super easy to measure. I see some of the watches are on. That's the easiest way. You would want to get that upon waking in the morning. So, and this is nearly impossible if you have a family or kids or a dog or whatever, but if you just were to wake without an alarm. If that's possible, do it. Otherwise, rest for 5 minutes or so early in the day and try to get that resting number. So what is it? It's the number of heartbeats per minute while at rest. That is a really good number to know. Usually we look about medically normal, anywhere from 60 to 100. I'll tell you, our athletes are typically low, 40, we've seen high 30s, and that just means their heart is so efficient, one beat can get the blood circulated much more than someone else having to do two in that same amount of time. So that's a really good number. Below 70 is better for most adults, common for athletes to be a bit lower. Things that can influence that: stress, sleep quality, fitness, hydration status, some medications. Right now we're seeing an influx of GLP use in some of our research studies. There's also data to suggest that can increase your heart rate, your resting heart rate. So that's just something that's come about from that. So measuring that and knowing that number is really good. It should be fairly consistent. We actually see some diseases or not diseases, but we've seen COVID and the flu and things artificially bumping that in our athletes where we can pick it up early. So it'll start to beat a little bit faster because of these other stresses coming on. The other number is your blood pressure. Does anybody know your blood pressure? Those are really important to know. And I want to point out, this tells you how hard your heart is working to move blood through your body. So that's the gist of it. And if you haven't had your doctor sort of describe that, it's like moving water through a hose. Right? And so if you were to condense that hose and build the pressure up, that's going to be high amount of pressure going through that. And if you were to leave it like that for a long time, let's say you cranked your hose, knotted it up, and left the house for 2 days, that thing's going to blow eventually. All right? And so that's the same way we think about the blood pressure in our system, is we want to get that lower. And some of the numbers have changed recently. They're very similar, but we want to be below 120 over 80. So the 120 is the pressure in your heart during contraction of the heart. And then the 80 is the pressure when it's relaxed. And you want those numbers to be low. Stage 1 hypertension starts at 139 over 89. So if you were to measure these, it's really important to know that for longevity and over health over a lifetime, we want to reduce that. So our exercise programs that we recommend can improve that 10 to 20%. Something that can be easily adjusted with activity. And then this 2 to 3 times risk in heart disease with elevated blood pressure.
Does weight training lower your blood pressure, not just cardiovascular?
What's that?
I said weight training can lower your blood pressure as well as cardiovascular exercise, or is it?
That's right, yeah. No, they can all help for sure. Cardiovascular exercise has been the primary one in the research, and resistance training came on late to the game for effects on general health. It was usually just muscle for a long time. But they're very easy to measure. There are over-the-counter ones you can do at home. If you're on blood pressure medications for anything, this may help in just sort of contextualizing what does that number actually mean. And then the lower we can get that, the better. Now, I'll tell you, there are family history things that play into this, and sometimes you cannot get that number lower, and medication may be required. And so you just need to pay attention to that and just figure out what works best for your lifestyle. But leaving it high is not an option. You've got to do something to get that number back down, because even if you don't want to be on a medication or whatever, like, it's doing damage internally that you can't feel until it's too late. And that's the biggest problem we have. The other thing you can measure is something called VO2 max. This is a laboratory-based measurement. I'm only mentioning it because we can measure all these things in our facility. So if you have anybody in your workplaces that want these things measured, we have the ability to have community come in. It's a pay for services, and you can have a full longevity package done where we do DEXA, body composition, VO2 max, you name it. We can add those to a profile that's really, really helpful to get this type of information. VO2 max is the amount of oxygen your body can utilize during intense exercise, and it's a really good predictor of longevity as well. But it gives us your fitness level, your aerobic fitness level. Some of that's genetic, but you can also train that to be higher the more aerobic exercise that you're doing. So what's interesting is if you take data across the like big cohorts, the top 2 to 3%, like the really, really elite, have a 5-fold lower all-cause mortality than the bottom 25%. And every notch you go up, you have the reduction. That's really, really important to understand that all of those things impacted, and the training we've talked about today take care of it. All right, so for the protein part of this, moving out of exercise to food, I'm only going to focus on protein for a couple of slides before we hit sleep. I want to acknowledge that the RDA just changed, so the recommended amount just moved up. And I've been doing work in this space for 25 years, and we've always wanted to see that number go up, and it finally has. So the new recommendation is 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So that is a number that translates to 0.54 to 0.73 grams per pound. What I recommend this is easier, is just to try to hit 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You don't normally hit it. You fall just a little short, and you hit 1.6, which is right where I want you. But if I recommend 1.6, which is kind of hard sometimes to get dialed in, and you miss low, now you haven't even hit the new recommendation of 1.2. So I'd rather have you aim for 1. There'd be no harm and possibly benefit, and usually you don't quite hit it, and you'll hit just where I want you to hit at 1.6. So that's the number. Again, aiming for 1 gram per pound, you'll end up at this 0.73 grams per pound most likely and be just fine. Each meal, we're looking for 20 to 40 grams of protein in each meal. The way I set up a plate always is where's my protein source first, and then I fill in my carbohydrates based on how much activity I've had or plan to do, and then the fats take care of themselves because it's embedded. I eat animal products, so it's embedded. If you're not an animal eater, you're vegetarian or vegan, you can certainly get enough protein. You just have to be a little more cognizant of exactly how you're eating. Because the number one issue is that to get the same amount of protein, you have to eat a lot more food to get the same amount of protein. So that tends to be the biggest issue. Totally fine though, you can get around that easily with good choices that complement each other on the types of proteins, like rice and beans, for example, is a complementary pairing where you can get all the protein you need. But sometimes you do have to eat more calories to get the same amount of protein that you would get otherwise. So that's just a consideration. But there are now supplements and things you can take to add to those types of diets that make it no problem at all if that's how you choose to eat. And I want...
That's amino acids.
You could take it as amino acids, but you can also take it as an intact protein. Yeah, so there's branched chain amino acids, there's essential amino acids. But I would first go for an intact protein, and then I would put those in if you're just low on leucine, for example. All right, so again, what can you add is an important piece. Rather than just, I gotta restrict. Okay, what can you add to get more protein today? Like the only thing you think about is how can you do that? I wanna show you, because people don't believe me, that Americans actually don't eat enough protein. We have a range of 10 to 35%, which is a full spectrum in terms of a percentage. And these data show that across the board, we're hitting right about 15%. On a scale that goes from 10 to 35. So it depends who you ask. Like if you ask me, we're nowhere near that 35%, and I've done the work to look at 25, 35, and 40% protein diets and how the benefits come. Yes, you hit the recommendation, so that's where people are saying that, but it's on the low side. It's like looking at blood work. If you get your blood work done and you're in range, well, what was I before? Was I when I felt my best, was I high? Was I low? If I'm just in range, who am I being compared to? You know, the blood work values that we're seeing are compared to anyone who's had blood work done. Most people getting blood work done are probably going because they have an issue. So now what's my normal? What should that actually look like? And I want to point out here that one of the things I talked about is holding on to muscle mass. So the previous recommendation for protein intake was 0.8. And when I used to show this, I was showing if you eat what we're told to eat, you will still be losing muscle mass, even if you resistance train. Now, luckily that shifted up, and this new green area is where we're located now for our recommendations, which means we should be able to maintain at that new level. So I want to just point out that that's where it's moving from, that we can actually maintain muscle mass with resistance training and protein intake. And if you're someone or know someone who's on the other end of the spectrum and is looking to lose body fat, and they're purposefully cutting calories to do so. This particular study that was run by Dr. Eddie Joe, he was one of our students back when we ran this, looked at patients going to the bariatric center in town, and then instead of getting surgery, they joined our study. So there weren't a lot of people who wanted to do that, but we did get some. And the people who did it they went into one of two groups. Both groups got more protein than they would normally get on a medically prescribed weight loss bariatric diet, which is extremely low in calories. One of those groups added resistance training to the program. All right, so these are the two groups. This is after 12 weeks, they all lost a lot of weight, so 100%. Of the weight lost, if you were in the control group who did not get the added resistance training, of the weight you lost, 24, let's call it 25, a quarter of your body weight that you lost was from your muscle. And interestingly, this matches GLP-1 data where if you don't do anything else, like resistance train and purposefully eat and fuel for this and train for it, you'll lose about 1/4 of your muscle mass in that endeavor. This group that added resistance training and had the higher protein intake only lost 4% of their muscle mass. So 25 versus 4 over 12 weeks. So very interesting data. I wish this got more press than it did. It was one of the neatest studies that I've been a part of, where we're able to show exactly what's going on with extreme weight loss. This is a lot of weight loss in a short amount of time because of the dietary prescription.
So is were the pounds about the same?
Yeah, for what they actually lost. Yeah, no significant difference between what they lost, but the distribution was wildly different.
Okay, with GLPs, they say 40% of what you lose is muscle if you're not doing strength training. If you're doing strength training, how much of that is still muscle loss?
Yeah, so I think 40% is probably a high estimate. The things I'm seeing across different review papers, when you take into account all the different kinds, is closer to 20, 24, 25% with no weight training. And there's several studies underway now that are looking at this exact thing, but with GLPs, and it looks like it'll be far less. I don't know the percentage yet, but from my colleagues that are doing that work, it looks like it'll be right around that 5% mark. So the thing with GLPs is you have to purposely be ready to train and be more focused on your diet, exercise, nutrition, and sleep than before. And that mindset is not always there. That has to be the mindset going into it.
What so many people tell me that are taking it is that they don't have an appetite and they're only eating like half what they used to eat. So how do you still get the protein that you need?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the biggest conundrums we have, is that you're not eating, so the protein drops, and then you're tired because you haven't eaten. And so then you get into this bout of not wanting to do anything. But I think there are ways that can be combated, but it certainly takes a lot of effort. Yeah.
Are you doing any research in your lab with the GLPs?
Not yet. No. We are not doing anything with it now, but we're seeing and having to eliminate it a lot from our current studies, where we're doing weight training and endurance training studies right now, but many of the people cannot be included because they're on them. So we're seeing much more of it for sure. Okay, so easy ways to hit these protein targets. Again, the recommendation is 1 gram per pound, because you're not going to hit it. You'll be just below, and that's fine. If you do hit it, no harm and possibly a benefit, so I would just go for it. You're looking at 20 to 40 grams per meal. The interesting part is that as we age, you need almost double the amount of protein to have the same muscle response you did when you were 20 years old. And also, as we age, your appetite goes down. So if your appetite is down a little bit and you need more protein, and protein's more fulfilling and satiating, now you got this space where you really have to focus on it, or use like liquid supplement versions, because that's an easy way, convenient way to get that same protein in. And sometimes you can drink it fast enough where you're not full yet, and you can just take it in. But typically on these diets, any of the programs I've done over all the years in protein and exercise studies, a higher protein diet has been consistently key to maintaining weight loss or to improving weight loss and maintaining muscle mass. A couple of upgrades just to show you. You've probably seen these before, but like switching sugary cereal for Greek yogurt, easy options. Lunch, if you're doing a traditional sandwich and chips, is switching to something with like a low mayo sort of chicken salad option or something like that is a really good program. I just wanted to show a couple of upgrades that are possible. So crackers here, 2 grams of protein versus hummus and carrots, 7 grams of protein. They all add up. The other thing now that you've probably seen is almost every food has an option that has like extra protein in it. I don't know that you actually need that. Protein's having an upswing right now. I've done 4 interviews about this in the last month. I like it because I know the data show it's better, but also you're paying more for it. And so you can pay attention to it more in your whole foods. But if it's in your snacks, I don't see a problem with it. I just don't think it's required. But it is, if I'm choosing, I'd choose to have a little bit of protein in there over time. All right, last bit is on sleep. I just have a couple of slides for you. This is a slide I posted a while back, but I want to just point out that I'm not impressed by how late and how early you work if that's what it takes for you to be efficient. I'm more interested in how efficient you are while you're awake. All right, so it's not a badge of honor to get less sleep. I don't know if it's a culture in your workplaces, but a lot of people are like, I was up all night, I pulled an all-nighter, I got this done. I'm like, why aren't you more efficient, man? Like, that's terrible. And so let's see how sleep impacts work performance. We know brain function, emotions, holy cow, even with our little kids, sleep and food, it's just like that in adults too. If if someone's having a problem, they're probably hungry or tired. Energy, health risks, all of those things come to a place with poor sleep. All right, and so having strategies to try to make the best out of that's important. One example here with weight and weight management I want to point out is that this particular study had folks that had 5 hours of sleep or 8 hours of sleep, and they looked at fat loss over time. And those that were just getting 5 hours of sleep had 55% less fat loss in this intervention study than the 8 hours of sleep for optimal fat loss. Now, it wasn't necessarily the sleep caused that, but the sleep did then make you less motivated, made you more hungry, more likely to make bad food decisions. All of those things compounded to have that end result. So less than 6 hours ended up 30% higher risk of obesity and diabetes. So try to track it. Now, there's trackers that you may all have. It's a whole other lecture probably. I had to take mine off because when I was wearing it, we had little kids and it would tell me every day that my sleep was terrible. Then I'm like, oh, it's my only day to actually train, but I'm in the red. Maybe I shouldn't train. So I was getting all messy in my head with it. So I had to take it off. But in some cases, it's nice to record and know where you're at and get a baseline. Maybe you're waking up more than you realize. I'll tell you, the apps all have their own problems and their own benefits. But the biggest key is to use the same one, keep it consistent. It may not be accurate, but it'll at least tell you changes from where you're at over time. All right, so what can you do? One of the biggest things for sleep, and I've been working in the sleep space now for a little while, and just because I think it's cool, the more aerobically fit you are, the better you handle short periods of acute sleep deprivation. So the more physically fit you are, the better you handle short periods of acute sleep deprivation. And we were calling that just a 30% reduction. So if you have a couple of nights in a row, not a huge deal, but the more physically fit you are, the better you handle those perturbations and what you're working with. So that's a cool one. We're about to write that study up now. One of my students just finished that for his dissertation. One of the big things with sleep, though, is a sleep schedule. That sounds funny, but for adults, if you can lock in your wake time and your go to bed time, that's a really big part. The consistency makes a big deal in overall sleep architecture. And so if you can lock that within 30 minutes of each night of going to bed and waking, that's optimal. And even on weekends. Now, one other caveat to that. If you were sleep deprived or something's come up and it's been terrible, I would take sleeping in to bank the sleep over getting up at your usual 6 a.m. to try to catch up. But as soon as you're caught up a little bit, go back to consistent as much as you possibly can. I had an awful experience with insomnia a couple years ago, and it's messed me up bad. But coming back from that, one of the biggest things is the sleep schedule. Locking in sleep bedtime within 30 minutes basically, but always the sleep wake time is the same. And that's helped a lot. Light exposure is important. First thing, early morning, getting light exposure, at least getting something in your face. That's a really big part of it. And it's 12:56 p.m. The other part of that's during the day. Like if you can have any structure where your office has a window, like try to have that in your face. And then when it's getting to be dusk, if you're capable, take your dog for a little walk around the block at that time, because seeing that dusk transition is actually really beneficial to getting into the role for sleep itself. So that's nice. Sleep environment, dark, cool, making sure you got lights on it. I get made fun of because when I travel, I take like black electrical tape with me, and I cover every of those bright lights that's blasting at me. Even up on the ceiling, because it just drives me nuts. And I try to like tape the blinds down because there's always a little crack that's trying to come in. But I travel with that. You can do a mask, white noise. All of that stuff is really, really helpful, but lock in your best sleeping environment for sure. And then be mindful of what you eat and drink. One of the big areas that my lab focuses on is actually what to eat before bed to improve sleep performance and all these other things. But I will tell you, large meals right before bed, probably not a great idea. But there are other things you can do. If you are hungry at night, talk to me separately. We can tell you different recommendations. But a huge meal before bed, not a great idea. And then drinking a lot of fluid would just make you get up to urinate. So you want to make sure that you're dialing that back a couple hours before, if you can, to have less fluid coming in, if you know that that wakes you up in the middle of the night. All right, so those are the main things. And my final thoughts here before a summary slide is around something called load management with athletes, right? This is about performance in athletes and how we think of workplace people as also as performing in your own work environment. We do load management with athletes, which means if you have a really hard week, the coaches will look at that load on your body and reduce it so that you come into the next peak season ready to go, the next performance day, the next game. Same thing in the workplace. If you have a cycle of work where it's been crazy and you know you're ramped up, either for yourself or for your employees, purposefully reduce time, reduce mental stress tasks so that you can get the total load back to a place that's manageable. You could even do it yourself with taking PTO or scheduling an extra day after one of those stressful periods, and that can help you sort of manage load. There's a company called Exos, and they do these kind of talks, but for huge corporations. And that is their main thing, is like managing load for the professional athlete, the professional CEO athlete, the professional workplace environment athlete. And they do a lot of this work. So balance effort and recovery, just like I do with an athlete, I would tell you to do the same in your workplace. Huge effort, have a little bit of recovery. Plan purposeful work recovery to get going again. All right, so take homes from today. Break up your sitting time. If you know you're sitting, that 11 plus hours a day, or at least sedentary, 6 hours sedentary, break up the sitting time. You can do that with purposeful movement or walks. It is hard to do if you're in a zone, if you're in a place where you need to get out, it's hard to get up and take a break. But if you can, move a little bit, even just little, they call them exercise snacks. Do a little exercise snack, take a walk, visit a friend, say hello for a second, go to the bathroom, whatever it is, try to get up. Resistance training, I would start with twice weekly if you can, but whatever you can do. That's a huge component here. Start at your level. Start where you need to start. Walking after meals, giant win metabolically for metabolic health. If you have nothing else that you can do right now because your life is stressed, could you walk 10 minutes after a meal? And that's it. Try to just include something. For your food, I would aim for 25, 30, even 40 grams per meal. Maybe you need to track it for a little bit to see what you eat if you don't know. And if you're down at 10 grams, try to get to 15. If you're already at 20, try to get to 25. Don't go immediately from 10 to 40. That'll be terrible. Just start where you're at and add a little bit. That'll be helpful. And then for sleep, you're aiming for 7 to 9 hours. I think you guys know that, but you have to plan it. You have to be purposeful about it. And someone said, if you're not going to get up early to do whatever you're doing, then don't stay up late to do it. So if you're not going to watch that Netflix show at 5 in the morning, don't watch it late at night. So take that as you will. Sometimes that's harder to do. I know that real life comes into play. And the last thing is focus on progress, not perfection. Nothing will be like that. Just be consistent. Progress day to day is really the big key. And so I like these habit-based things in the book that was described earlier that we put out, which is a video and a book, a lecture series. We do habits. We do small habits after each of these little lectures, and that is just something easy to implement. The small, consistent changes are exactly what we're looking for, because that quality of your life is determined by the quality of your habits. I can tell a lot about my team by the quality of their daily habits. All right, if you're interested in any of the testing that we offer, or your team is, the easiest place to go is to email issm@fsu.edu. That's the easiest thing. You'll get a hold of our outreach coordinator and testing coordinator. His name's Cooper. He will do a checklist with you, do a call, decide with you what makes sense and what doesn't. We're not in the business of selling you everything we have, although I wish we were. It's just the things that we think might be helpful for what your goals are. I have a ton of podcasts and books out there if you're interested in these topics. This is the book title. This is just one of the podcasts that exists, but just searching those will be good. I would encourage you to follow along at Mike Ormsbee or at FSU ISSM if you're on social media at all. Those are places where we put our research, we put topics, we put different studies that we're working on, things I'm thinking about almost daily on there. And I think you'll have a really good starting point for a place to begin that next journey or to get your clients or your employees to a place where they can start. I think that's the last of it, and there's it. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it.